Welcome back to Chess TV. We hope you've had a great week. In this week's episode, Arne Johansson talks early Swedish chess history. We've prepared a brand new chess puzzle for you. Albert continues with Machiavelli and me, and Alfred starts up a new opening, the Slav defense. But before we hand over to Albert, here's an update on what's been going on in the world of chess. In a fantastic turn of events in the final 11th round of what is considered to be the strongest European individual women's chess championship in history, Valentina Gunina defeated the earlier leader Anna Mushtuk and claimed the title of European champion. Top-seeded Mushtuk was a whole point ahead of her nearest followers before the last round and only needed a draw to secure the clear first place. But Gunina, playing with the white pieces, applied strong pressure on Black's position and eventually crashed through the defenses to take home the game. In another important game, Tatiana Kostenseva skillfully outplayed Nana Danginze with the Black pieces, took like 8.5 points and joined Gunina and Mushtuk on the shared first place. Congratulations. Another exciting outcome of the European Women's Championship was that 13-year-old Alexandra Koryanchenko conquered the last norm of her VGM title. The young Russian girl finished 40th with 6 points out of 11, competing with a large number of grandmasters and international masters. With completing her VGM norm, Koryanchenko becomes the youngest VGM in the world and gets very close to the record of the youngest VGM in history, which is held by world champion Hu Yifan, who was 12 years and 3 months. Congratulations and best of luck in the future. The registrations for the World Amateur Chess Championship, part of the Games Festival 2012, are in progress. 1 month before the start of the organizing committee has announced 212 participants in the 3 chess competitions, the largest of them being the World Amateur Chess Championships that has attracted record interest, 141 players from 30 countries so far. Visit gamesfestivals.com for more information on the events, registrations and details. 2 weeks ago, the Russian Chess Federation started a voting contest allowing chess fans to select the 10th player in the 7th Mikhail Tal Memorial. In the thrilling finale, English Grandmaster Luke McShane was placed on the top with 3,860 votes. Alexei Shirov came in second with 3,732 votes, followed by Shakiryan Mamedyarov and women's world champion Hu Yifan. So far, Magnus Carlsen, Vladimir Kramnik, Levon Aronian, Timur Rajabov, Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana have confirmed the participation, which makes this quite an interesting event. So now it's time for Albert. Here we go.
We've previously talked about democratic and autocratic principalities, but there is also a third category, the Church. For an ecclesiastical principality, their problems only arise before the takeover. Machiavelli argues that because the power is maintained by laws and regulations that have been held sacred for so long and are so powerful and effective, they can keep their rulers in power no matter how they behave and live. The argument is that there is a higher power that sets the order and that it neither can nor should be questioned. This type of states are rare today, but it strikes me that the method of reasoning in many cases fit the ideologically driven states. For example, consider communism. In the name of a purpose, the communist state, an ideal which in itself could not be questioned, the ideology sort of turned into something of a religion. The purpose was already set, since it was said to be for the greater good of humanity, as if a higher power had granted the state power to rule in order to reach the set out goal. The result of the communist ideology was systematic destruction of initiative and free thinking, while hundreds of millions of people lost their lives. But that is perhaps another story. What I would like to talk about here is rather the power in itself. Wouldn't it be an ideal solution to have power mandated by someone else? Someone who is above everything and can't ever be wrong. That would mean that the ruler and his power couldn't be questioned either. I've been thinking a lot about this in a chess context. What if you could keep the control of the board with the support of more than just your own authority. That would mean that you could force the opponent into a position where he knows that he's not just playing you, but also against someone who doesn't make mistakes. And while I was thinking about it, it struck me that that's exactly what you do when you play conventional openings in chess. It is, among a lot of other benefits, a way to show your opponent that you have the help of more than just your own intelligence, that you lean against great players and their already devised strategies. And with that, I think it's time for Alfred with the opening school.
Last week we finished our analysis of the Queen's Indian defense. For quite some time we have analyzed Black's answer knight to f6 against White's d4. So for this week's episode I thought we would take a look at the maybe more natural answer in this position, namely d5. More precisely, I thought that we in this week's episode would take a look at the Slav defense. The Slav defense is introduced already in the second move after White's c4 by Black's c6. The advantages with this move is that it not only builds up a solid pawn structure for Black, but it does so without blocking the bishop on c8. In difference from the Queen's Gambit decline, which occurs after Black's e6 instead of c6. Some of you might wonder why Black should play c6 at all and not only capture on c4 with the pawn. Well, by taking on c4, Black enters the Queen's Gambit accepted, a fully playable line, but in most cases Black has to give the pawn back, since protecting it often has a greater cost than the advantage of keeping it. Even if the variation is called a gambit, White gets the pawn back in almost all variations without much struggle. So even though a capture on c4 gives Black a pawn, Black can only keep it in the short run, making the capture an average move and not better than c6. After c6, White has to seriously consider whether or not to allow the c-pawn to stay unprotected, because after Black's c6, the Queen's side has to strengthen significantly, especially considering Black's plan to capture on c4 followed by b5. One way of dealing with the threat is to play c5. Unfortunately, this is a stupid move, not since White suddenly has a far worse position or because the pawn is lost, but simply because White doesn't gain anything from this move. It only relieves the pressure in the center, and that is in turn something White should want to hold on to. No, c5 is not recommended. So how should White deal with the threat of Black capturing on c4 in an easy way? Well, except for c5, the easiest way is simply to exchange on d5. Even though this move might seem simple and because of that bad, it can lead to very interesting games, and the line has been played by a large number of grandmasters. Unfortunately, many players have used the symmetrical design for prearranged draws by playing knight to c3, followed by knight to c6, knight to f3, knight to f6, bishop to f4, bishop to f5, and as we see, Black copies White's move, and after e3, e6, bishop to d3, an exchange on d3, bishop to d6, and an exchange on d6, followed by both players castling kingside. Both players have developed exactly the same way, and even though White is a move ahead, there is no advantage to speak of, leading to both players to draw before too soon. So let's go back to after White's bishop to f4. This is where the theory for the line begins. We are still in an almost completely symmetrical position, but this is Black's first real chance of breaking the cycle. There are some possibilities even before that, but they are mostly unexplored. Among Black's options other than bishop to f5, we can also find a6 and e6. e6 might seem a bit dangerous considering the threat knight to b5 followed by a fork on c7, but Black can effectively defend himself by only playing queen to a5 check, a move which forces white to retreat with the knight to c3. With this short introduction to the slab defense, I'll end this week's episode of The Opening School. In next week's episode, we'll analyze the exchange variation in more depth, so see you then.
This week we'll solve an easier chess puzzle, but it's still a challenge. You only got 1 minute to find the checkmate in 2 moves that white makes on black. And if you manage to recognize the opening from which this position has occurred, you get a bonus point, so good luck. Well, let's see if you found the right variation. To get a checkmate here in 2 moves, our first move must be a check. If it wouldn't be a check, black would just play queen d1 check, and our second move that was supposed to be the checkmating move would just in fact be a blocking move to avoid the check. So the checking first moves we'll try here is queen b3, pawn e6, and knight g5. Queen b3 check feels quite natural. Our queen and bishop starts to cooperate, and together they cover many squares around the black king. But there is an escape square here, namely g6, plus black can simply play rook e6. We can, however, get a fork here by playing knight g5 check, but that's still not a checkmate. Pawn e6 check is a rather desperate attempt, but after black's capture of the pawn with the rook, we just don't have a chance of checkmating black here. So let's take a look on what happens on knight g5 check. Black can't play his king to g6 thanks to our queen, and f6 is not a possible square thanks to our pawn on e5. The e6 square is guarded by our knight, and e7 and f8 are both covered by our bishop. Black's only possible move is therefore king g8. Queen to b3 seems as a good move here, but it does not result in a checkmate. Instead, we play queen captures on h7, which of course is the right move and also a checkmate. And the bonus question, which opening has resulted in this position? It's a pretty unusual opening, a gambit actually, and the fact that white doesn't have his b, c or d pawns and the black doesn't have his d, e and f pawns clearly shows that this is an evens gambit game. This is also confirmed by the fact that black's bishop stands on a5 and that white bishop is standing on a3. But both white rooks are gone, which means that this is likely a composed puzzle. So that's it. Congratulations to all of you who found the solution, and great job if you figured out the bonus question. You all deserve to sit back and enjoy this week's episode of the Chess History with Professor Arne Johansson. Enjoy!
There is not much documented about the earliest profiles in Swedish chess history. I have mentioned that there were 2 profiles in Stockholm already in the late 18th century. It was the geography professor Daniel Djurberg and the royal architect Olof Tempelman. When we enter into the 19th century, there appears an interesting pair in the form of a father and son, Svanberg. The father was Jöns Svanberg, who was born in Nederkalix in the north of Sweden in 1771, and he later studied in Uppsala, where he also made an academic career. In those days, the academic profiles were usually quite broad, and so was definitely the case also with Jöns Svanberg. He got a doctoral degree in theology, which meant that he also became a priest, and in fact was active as such for a period. But he also became professor in mathematics and worked in mechanics and astronomy. He corresponded with the great scientists of his days, with names such as Lagrange and Laplace. A somewhat curious story about his scientific work is related to the fact that some scientists at that time had made experiments that contradicted Newton's prediction that the Earth should be affected by rotation in such a way that it should be wider at the equator and flattened near the poles. Svanberg manufactured a set of scientific instruments and set out for an expedition to Lapland in the north of Sweden. He carried out very accurate measurements that could confirm Newton's prediction. He was apparently quite proud of his achievement and wrote a letter to the Crown Prince of Sweden, who later became King Oscar I, informing him about the results and ends by suggesting that a future economic support for continued scientific efforts would be welcome. This is a picture of the last page of that letter. Jöns Svanberg was also the secretary of the Royal Academy of Sciences, and when he was in Stockholm he took the opportunity to get acquainted with the chess players there. There is hardly anything documented about his chess interest other than an anecdote in the article by Robert Salberg about early chess in Stockholm. In the 1830s, the Stockholm chess players gathered at Watsau's restaurant at Storkyrkobrinken in the Old Town of Stockholm. And in 1839 they put an ad in the Gothenburg newspaper Göten, where they challenged the Gothenburg chess players to a correspondence game. The challenge was taken and move by move were published in the newspapers Aftonbladet in Stockholm and Handelstidningen in Gothenburg. The game was later also published in Berliner Schachzeitung in 1849 and can be found in a small booklet by Hjalmar Mandahl with the title The First Documented Swedish Chess Game. The Gothenburg players made a serious mistake already in the 10th move, but the Stockholm team allowed them to replace that with a new move. In a later stage of the game, the Stockholm team got into a difficult situation and decided to contact Jöns Svanberg in Uppsala for assistance. Hence it seems that Jöns Svanberg was considered to be the strongest chess player in the Stockholm-Uppsala area. One should keep in mind that there was no quick connection like railway between Stockholm and Uppsala at that time, so they sent Watsau by horse to Uppsala. Salberg writes that Watsau willingly accepted the mission. He consulted Jöns Svanberg, who managed to find a move that solved the problem, and the Stockholm team finally won the game after 53 moves. The interesting aspect with this game is that it is the first documented Swedish chess game. Jöns appears to have been an acknowledged chess profile, but his son Adolf was even more so. He also followed in his father's footsteps in the academic world, and we will return to his life and career next week. We end today with the first documented Swedish chess game, so enjoy.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode and that you'll be back again next week, because we will. So hope to see you then. Bye!